The man stepped forward and told the queen, "Do not eat that food," and the vast crystal hall fell silent. Music died mid-note, servants froze with silver trays hovering in the air, and even the queen's breath seemed to stop. She sat upon a throne carved from living stone, crowned in starlight and tradition, her gaze sharp enough to peel truth from lies. No one spoke to her unbidden, no one interrupted the feast of ascension, and certainly no outsider warned her of danger. Guards tightened their grips on electro spears, diplomats leaned away as if treason were contagious, and the man stood alone. He wore no sigil of rank, no noble colors, only a travel-worn coat and eyes that had seen too much to bow easily. The queen studied him with measured calm, noting the faint scars on his hands and the certainty in his voice. "You dare interrupt sacred custom," she said softly, her words carrying farther than a shout. "I dare because you will die if you eat that," the man replied, his voice steady, respectful, unafraid. A murmur rippled through the hall, like a disturbed tide. The food before her gleamed beautifully, jewel-bright fruits, steaming cuts of ceremonial meat, sauces prepared by priest-chefs sworn to purity. Poison was unthinkable, yet the man did not look mad, desperate, or hungry for attention. The queen raised one finger, halting the guards, and inclined her head slightly. "Speak," she commanded, "and understand that your next words decide whether you leave alive." The man exhaled slowly, as though relieved to finally be allowed to finish the thought he had carried too long. "My name does not matter," he said, "but my people learned this lesson in blood." He explained that he came from beyond their mapped stars, from a world that once welcomed the queen's kind as honored guests. They had shared food, rituals, and trust, believing tradition to be proof against malice. During a similar feast, a similar dish had been served, harmless to one species, lethal to another. The toxin was not an attack, not sabotage, but biology misunderstood and ignored. By the time they realized the truth, 3 ambassadors lay dead, and war followed grief like a shadow. The hall listened now, skepticism battling an uneasy recognition of possibility. The queen's advisors whispered among themselves, calculating political damage, scientific likelihoods, and the cost of insult. "You claim our food will kill me," the queen said, "yet my ancestors have eaten this for generations." "Yes," the man answered, "and it will not harm your people, but your body is different now." He gestured subtly toward her crown, woven with bio-adaptive crystal. "You merged with living technology during your coronation," he continued. "Your chemistry changed just enough." Silence returned, heavier than before. No one had considered that ancient rituals might interact with modern evolution. The queen felt a faint chill beneath her composure, the kind that came when truth brushed close. The queen did not move, but her mind raced through possibilities. "Words are wind," she said, "bring proof." The man nodded, as if he had expected nothing less. From his coat he produced a small device, worn, cracked, and humming softly. With a flick of his thumb, a hologram blossomed into the air, showing molecular patterns twisting and aligning. He overlaid the image of the ceremonial dish with a scan of the queen's altered biology. Where they intersected, warning glyphs flared crimson. Gasps echoed through the hall. Scientists surged forward despite protocol, eyes wide with dawning horror. The toxin was subtle, slow, activated only in the presence of her crown's living lattice. It would not kill instantly. It would dissolve her from within over days, leaving no trace of foul play. The perfect, accidental death. The queen finally rose from her throne, her expression unreadable. "You saved my life," she said, "intentionally or not." She turned to the priests, who now looked stricken rather than proud. "Tradition does not excuse ignorance," she declared. The dish was removed, hands trembling. The man felt the tension ease slightly, though he knew the story was far from finished. Saving a queen did not make one safe, it made one visible. The court demanded answers, accountability, and someone to blame. Some accused the man of manipulation, others of staging the danger he claimed to prevent. Foreign envoys quietly recalculated alliances, sensing weakness and opportunity. The Queen silenced them all with a single gesture. "This man crossed fear, distance, and protocol to warn us," she said. "That matters." She ordered a full review of all cross-species rituals, no matter how sacred. In private, she met the man again, without throne or crown. "You could have warned us quietly," she said. "Why make it public?" "Because secrets rot," he replied, "and I wanted your people to see that survival requires change." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. "You have cost me comfort," she said, "but perhaps saved my reign." She offered him a place as liaison between worlds, a bridge forged from hard truth. He accepted, not for honor, but because walking away would only delay the next disaster. The Feast of Ascension was remembered not for its splendor, but for its pause. The moment when a hall full of power listened instead of punished. Stories spread across the stars of the Queen who did not eat, and the man who dared to warn her. Other worlds began questioning their own certainties, their own beautiful traditions. The Queen ruled longer than prophecy predicted, adapting as she had that night. And the man became a reminder that courage does not always wear armor or carry banners. Sometimes it simply steps forward and speaks when silence would be safer. Long after the echoes faded from that crystal hall, the lesson remained. That survival favors those who listen, even when the warning ruins the meal. Time did not slow after the feast, it accelerated as though the universe itself had been waiting for permission to move. Within days, the Queen's decision rippled outward across her empire, touching worlds that had never seen her face, yet lived under the weight of her traditions. Ritual audits became mandates, priesthoods were forced to open sealed archives, and scientists once dismissed as heretical were summoned to speak. For many, this was not progress, but sacrilege. The man watched it unfold from the edge of power, aware that survival often breeds resentment rather than gratitude. Every custom questioned felt like an accusation, and every change demanded an enemy to blame. Whispers followed him through corridors grown colder with suspicion. Some said he was an agent of foreign destabilization. Others claimed he had orchestrated the danger himself. The Queen heard all of it and said nothing, which frightened them more than anger ever could. She met with him often now, sometimes to discuss policy, sometimes simply to listen. Without her crown, she looked smaller, not weaker, but real. "You altered the course of my reign," she said during one such meeting, "and history will either praise or curse you for it." "I am used to both," the man replied. He told her more of his world then, of the aftermath of their own failure to listen. How fear had hardened into doctrine, doctrine into weapons. How they had won the war and lost themselves. The Queen listened with the same intensity she had shown the night of the feast. It was becoming her defining trait, and it terrified her enemies. Resistance did not come loudly at first, it arrived dressed as concern. A high ritualist questioned whether outsiders should influence sacred law. A fleet commander worried that appearing adaptable might invite aggression. An entire sector petitioned to retain their ancestral practices untouched. Each argument was polished, logical, and rooted in fear of loss. The Queen answered none of them immediately. Instead, she ordered a simulation. A projection of the Empire 50 cycles into the future, unchanged, unexamined. The results were devastating. Worlds lost to incompatibility, alliances shattered by biological misunderstandings, rulers dead from ceremonial kindness. When she revealed the simulation publicly, the silence that followed was heavier than the one in the feast hall. That was when the first attempt on the man's life occurred. It was subtle, elegant, and designed to look like chance. A transport malfunction, a pressure seal failure timed to vacuum. He survived only because he had learned long ago that accidents favored the unprepared. Security reacted swiftly, but the message had already landed. Change had enemies willing to kill quietly. The Queen summoned him immediately, her expression dark with something close to regret. "I can protect you," she said, "but not without consequence." He smiled faintly. "Protection is not why I stayed," he answered. The investigation uncovered a faction within the priesthood. Not extremists, but purists. They believed survival without tradition was extinction of the soul. To them, the Queen's willingness to listen was weakness disguised as wisdom. They did not seek her death, not yet. They sought to isolate her, to erode trust, to frame adaptation as betrayal. The man became their symbol of contamination. Every reform pointed back to him, every discomfort bore his shadow. He knew this pattern well, it had played out the same way on his world. When the second attempt came, it was public. During a council address, a ceremonial blade was thrown, not at the Queen, but at him. It missed by a breath, embedding itself in the wall behind where he stood. The chamber erupted, guards subdued the attacker, and the Queen rose in fury. But the man raised a hand, stopping her command for execution. "Listen to him," he said calmly, "before you silence him forever." The attacker screamed that tradition was dying, that the Queen had been poisoned by foreign thought. The Queen ordered his confinement instead of death. That decision fractured what little unity the purists still claimed. The empire began to split along lines not of species or territory, but of philosophy. Those who believed survival required listening, and those who believed endurance required rigidity. The man traveled now, at the Queen's request, not as an envoy of authority, but as a witness. He stood in halls like the one where he had first spoken, telling the same story again and again. Not demanding agreement, only consideration. Some worlds embraced change eagerly, others tolerated it cautiously. A few rejected it entirely, closing their borders and clinging to ritual like a lifeline. One such world paid the price. A coronation feast, unchanged, unquestioned. A newly crowned ruler, enhanced with modern biotech. Dead within the week. The news spread faster than any decree ever could. Grief did what logic could not. The purist movement began to fracture under the weight of consequence. The Queen addressed the empire then, not as a monarch, but as a survivor. "We honor tradition by ensuring it does not kill us," she said. And for the first time, applause filled the void where outrage had lived. The man did not celebrate. Victory, he knew, was never claimed. The cost had been lives, fear, and blood. He had simply shifted the direction of loss, not erased it. One evening, as stars burned cold beyond the palace windows, the Queen asked him a question she had carried for some time. "Why did you really step forward that night?" she asked, knowing what it would cost. He considered lying, offering something noble and simple. Instead, he told the truth. "Because I was tired of surviving mistakes that could have been prevented," he said. "Because silence killed more people than courage ever did." The Queen nodded slowly, understanding settling into her like a second spine. She offered him a formal title then, a place in history carved in stone. He declined. "Names fade," he said, "lessons last." She accepted that, with a smile tinged by sadness. The empire continued to change, unevenly, imperfectly, but undeniably. And long after the man departed the core worlds, traveling onward to warn others beyond the Queen's reach. The story endured. Not of a feast interrupted, but of a moment when power chose to listen. When survival proved stronger than pride. And when one voice, steady and unafraid, reminded an empire that adaptation was not surrender. It was the oldest form of strength. The man did not announce his departure, because departures invited attention and attention invited control. He left the capital world quietly, aboard a civilian transport bound for the outer lanes, carrying nothing that marked him as important. By then, the empire no longer needed his presence to continue changing, which was both the goal and the cost. Ideas, once released, did not require their originator to survive. The Queen watched his ship depart from a high balcony, the city glowing beneath her like a living constellation. She felt the strange weight of gratitude mixed with relief, because allies who ask nothing are harder to replace than armies. She returned to her duties without ceremony, because rule was not a pause but a current. Reforms continued, councils argued, and the empire bent rather than broke. Beyond the core worlds, the man traveled where charts thinned and certainty dissolved. He found cultures untouched by the Queen's influence, some curious, some hostile, some indifferent. In each place, he told a different version of the same story, shaped to fit their fears. Not all listened, and not all survived their refusal. On one dust world, elders laughed at him and served the feast unchanged. On another, a child ruler hesitated long enough to live. The man never stayed to see the outcome, because witnessing aftermath could anchor regret. He moved on, lighter for having spoken, heavier for knowing words were never guarantees. Back in the empire, opposition did not vanish, it evolved. The purists learned that open defiance failed, so they turned to nostalgia. They spoke of golden ages, of unity lost, of strength diluted by caution. The Queen countered not with force, but with memory. She opened archives, revealed how many golden ages had ended in silence and grave. Truth became her sharpest weapon. Years passed, and the Feast of Ascension changed. It became modular, adaptive, monitored by science as much as faith. Some called it diminished, others called it safer. The Queen called it honest. Children born after the silence in the hall grew up hearing the story as legend. A man without rank, a warning spoken, a life spared. In some versions, he was a prophet, in others a trickster, in a few a myth entirely. The Queen never corrected them. Meaning was more powerful when discovered than dictated. The man aged as he traveled, his hair graying, his steps slowing. But his voice never lost its steadiness. On a remote station at the edge of mapped space, he finally stopped. Not because he was finished, but because his body was. He recorded one final message, intended for no specific ruler, no specific world. Only for whoever might need it next. He spoke of listening as an act of strength, of tradition as a tool, not a master, of silence as the most dangerous custom of all. Then he sent the message into the network, untagged, uncredited, unguarded. The Queen received it years later, by chance rather than design. She listened alone, without crown or court. When it ended, she did not weep. She simply sat, understanding that the truest legacies never announce their end. The empire endured, imperfect and adaptive, scarred but alive. Other empires learned more slowly, or not at all. History continued doing what it always did, rewarding humility occasionally and punishing arrogance relentlessly. And somewhere beyond recorded space, the man's words echoed on, carried by those who had never known his name, spoken by voices that did not know they were continuing a warning first uttered in a crystal hall. The lesson survived, even when the speaker did not. That survival begins not with power, but with the courage to interrupt silence. And that sometimes the most important moment in history is not a victory, but a pause.